Baby steps.
After your faith hasn't let you down.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Look for the good in everyone.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Osland, a licensed therapist and certified life coach. And over the 13-year history of this podcast, we've shared a lot of listener essays, stories, reflections, and deeply personal explorations from you, the audience. And I've decided it's time to bring some of those voices back to life, to dust them off and, well, resurrect them. We'll call it the morning of the first resurrection. After all, resurrection is really about healing, restoring the body, mind, and soul to their most pristine, integrated state. So I thought, what if we could use modern tools like ChatGPT and Notebook LM to create a kind of AI puppet show? A thoughtful, playful deep dive into the mental health layers underneath these listener essays. Now, I'm creating this series for two audiences, primarily. First, for students studying for the National Counselor exam to help you explore these stories as real-world case studies. And second, for anyone who's ever wrestled with similar experiences to help you see the psychological and emotional insights that might apply to your own life. So, it's my pleasure to share these resurrected essays with you, renewed, reimagined, and ready for reflection. All right? Are you ready? Hold on to your hats and glasses.
'Cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
20 years ago, photojournalist Kevin Carter was sent by a South African newspaper to document the ongoing famine in Sudan. Overwhelmed by what he saw at a crowding feeding centre, Carter took a stroll into the bush to calm his nerves. In the middle of a clearing, he came across an emaciated toddler, too weak to stand, struggling to crawl towards the feeding centre. As he raised his camera to frame the scene, a vulture landed behind the little girl, hungrily awaiting her death. Carter reports waiting 20 minutes for the vulture to fly off before chasing it away and then sitting under a tree, smoking a cigarette and talking to God. He was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his photo in May 1994, but died at his own hand 2 months later. His suicide note describes being haunted by the death and the suffering to which he'd been witness during his career. As a parent, I cannot allow myself to imagine my own child in Carter's frame. As I begin to flirt with doing so, my throat tightens painfully and I have to blink hard to keep my vision clear. What happened to that little girl is unknown, but the photo is immortalized as an icon of human suffering. To many atheists, pictures like this are conclusive proof of the non-existence of a loving God, a deity that permits innocent children to starve while simultaneously finding your car keys, allowing you to get home safely, and nourishing and strengthening your body day after day is clearly not worth believing in. This is a powerful emotional argument, except it fails logically. Christianity in general, and Mormonism in particular, handles the problem of evil really quite well. I shall list 10 solutions or theodicies. Number 1. Opposition in all things. You have to taste the bitter so that you might know the sweet. Number 2. Soul-making. Even the worst trials will give you experience and shall be for your good. Number 3. Eternal time frame. Your adversity and affliction shall be but a small moment, and if you endure it well, you shall be exalted on a high. Number 4. The free will defense. God permits your suffering from chains of events initiated by human choices. Number 5. Divine hiddenness. God preserves your faith by strategically limiting his intervention. Number 6. The best of all possible worlds. The conditions of this world are tuned for a maximum number of souls to achieve salvation. Number 7. Deus ex machina. In the end, God will resolve all contradictions, injustices, and unknowns. Number 8. Atonement. God sent Jesus to suffer to save you and succor you according to your infirmities. Number 9. Darkness and light. Just as cold is the absence of heat, so all evil you perceive is but the absence of God's influence. And number 10. Divine incomprehensibility. God works in mysterious ways which are not your ways. His thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and you should not lean unto your own understanding. The argument from divine incomprehensibility is a particularly interesting one because it makes it very difficult to prove the existence of gratuitous evil. That is to say, the existence of objectively pointless suffering, the sort with which a loving God could not logically coexist. The classic analogy is that of a chess grandmaster. If I were to observe a grandmaster in play, his strategy would certainly be beyond me. In this situation, it's very probable that he might make a move that seems, to me, gratuitous, say, allowing his queen to be taken, but which ultimately serves the greater good and leads to victory. This is fairly straightforward, but let us consider for a moment the perspective of the grandmaster's opponent. To an opponent of my own deplorable skill level, the unexpected gambit might appear gratuitously good, while the consequent checkmate is a crushing defeat. This twist of perspective opens up the door to a parallel line of thinking that I have found intriguing. That, while there is plenty of exploration of the problem of evil, we rarely, if ever, hear discussion of the problem of good. What if there is a God and his nature corresponds to what we would label evil? What if everything we perceive to be wrong with the world is in fact a direct fulfillment of the divine will? One might contend that a benevolent God permits evil in order to further his loving purposes. But why is that any more tenable than the conception of a malevolent deity who permits good to exist to further his sinister objectives? It is my contention that each of the theodicies I have mentioned has an evil twin, a goateed Vulcan doppelganger. Just flip the theodicy on its head, like that primary song in which a smile turned upside down becomes a frown. Thus, number 10. Divine incomprehensibility. God's omniscience allows all events to maximize ultimate harm, even if his machinations are beyond your limited understanding. Number 9. Darkness and light. Just as cold is the absence of heat, so all good you perceive is but the absence of God's influence. Number 8. Atonement. God sent Jesus to suffer to damn you and increase your infirmities. Number 7. Deus ex machina. In the end, God will maximize all contradictions, injustices, and unknowns. Number 6. The best of all possible worlds. The conditions of this world are tuned to maximize human pain and suffering. Go! Number 5. Divine hiddenness. God gives you false hope by strategically limiting his intervention. Number 4. The free will defense. God permits your well-being from chains of events initiated by human choices. Number 3. Eternal time frame. Your joy and happiness shall be but a small moment compared to the infinite suffering in store for you in the hereafter. Number 2. Soul-making. The most pleasant experiences of life increase the extent to which you can be broken. Number 1. Opposition in all things. You have to taste the sweet so that you might know the bitter. So, all of these theodicies can be flipped by substituting good for evil and accordingly reflecting God's processes. Each attempt to reconcile the existence of evil in the world with a loving God can, at the same time, harmonize the presence of goodness in the world with a wicked God. Where does this leave us? Well, it becomes unreasonable to use any of these theodicies as a defense of God's loving nature. If they work with a nasty God as well as with a nice one, then they aren't helpful in informing us of his true nature and motives. I don't claim that the problem of evil has a diametrically opposed problem of good in all possible respects, but I'd be very interested to hear any response to the problem of evil that cannot be accordingly reflected. I think most people would very readily reject the possibility of an evil God, But in that case, I would ask, under what premises is an evil deity any less likely than a loving one? What does this mean for those who try to make sense of suffering in the world through the lens of theistic belief? If there is indeed true equilibrium between the two sides of the argument, can we use the epistemological voluntarism popularized by Terrell Givens and simply choose to believe in a good God? Other questions that arise include, what happens when we throw the concept of Satan into the mix? How might an evil God employ the concept of atonement and expiatory sacrifice? Under what conditions might a good God lie to mankind, and would it ever be possible to detect that lie? Finally, how do the Euthyphro dilemma and the moral argument for God handle the inversion of God's nature?
That was a great old listener essay from Infants on Thrones. Newly resurrected on the first morning of intellectual reckoning, not to stand before a judgment bar exactly, but perhaps before the mirror of reason itself, presented here as an AI puppet show for the soul who cannot help but ask, what kind of God lets this happen? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty intense. It's both deeply human and clinically complex.
Yeah, we're diving into a case study that really sits at this crossroads.
Yeah.
Where philosophy, existential questions, they just slam right into trauma and psychology.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore how someone with immense curiosity and, frankly, a huge heart, a lot of compassion, can end up in a kind of spiritual crisis. What happens when trying to understand suffering leads to what our sources call a meaning collapse.
And this deep dive really has two aims. For you, the listener, maybe grappling with similar questions, we want to offer a relatable story, a way to see how these struggles play out in a real person. But also, for those of you who might be counseling students, maybe prepping for exams like the NCE, we're structuring this as a full case analysis, step by step.
So we'll cover diagnosis, ethics, theory, interventions, the whole clinical picture.
Precisely. It's a look at navigating this kind of moral, spiritual despair from the inside out and from the clinician's chair.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack the story of David, who's our focus today. So David, he's described as being in his late 30s, a writer, a father, thoughtful guy. And when he comes into therapy, it's not for, the usual suspects like anger or general anxiety. He describes this profound moral fatigue.
That's a powerful phrase, moral fatigue.
Isn't it? Like a soul-deep exhaustion. He links it directly to trying to intellectually grapple with the sheer scale of global suffering, and his body just couldn't keep up.
It sounds like he wasn't avoiding life itself, but maybe the emotional weight of life, the cost of empathy.
Yeah. He wasn't coming to therapy because he felt he was bad, but almost because he was too good. Too sensitive.
Yeah.
And that sensitivity had become, a burden, physically manifesting.
Right. And there's a specific trigger, isn't there? A catalyst that haunted him for decades.
Yes. That photo. The Kevin Carter photograph from Sudan in 1993.
Ah, yes. The image of the starving toddler and the vulture.
That exact one. Deeply, deeply disturbing. It became this sort of central node for his entire crisis.
That photo raises so many ethical questions in photojournalism. It's pure helplessness captured. And for someone like David with that intense moral sensitivity,
becomes proof of something broken.
Or at least it forces the question, if this is possible, what does it fundamentally say about, everything? About the nature of existence?
And the sources really emphasize the physical shock he still feels. He talks about imagining his own child in that photo.
Oh, wow.
And the reaction is immediate, physical. He describes this sharp, painful tightness in his throat. His vision blurs. He literally has to force himself to blink to break the image.
So it's not an abstract thought exercise for him. It's visceral, a full-body confrontation with horror.
Totally. And then there's the added layer of the photographer himself, Kevin Carter.
Right, the tragic element there. Carter won the Pulitzer Prize for that photo.
Fame, recognition for capturing this absolute horror.
But less than a year later, he died by suicide. His note mentioned being haunted, talking to God, apparently.
Yeah. And David seems to really identify with Carter's situation. That terrible conflict being rewarded for documenting despair, but feeling powerless to intervene.
That sense of haunted helplessness.
Exactly. David feels it too. He sees himself as an observer of global cruelty, living in relative safety, and feels implicated. Guilty almost, just by witnessing it and surviving.
Which leads him down this intense intellectual path because the raw emotion is just too much to bear directly.
It seems so. He tries to solve the problem of suffering, Philosophically, theologically.
Okay, so he starts compiling traditional arguments,
Yeah.
defenses for why suffering exists.
Yeah, and this is where we need to talk about theodicy.
Right, so for listeners, a theodicy is basically, well, it's an attempt to square a circle, philosophically.
How can you have an all-powerful, all-good God and also have evil and intense suffering in the world?
Check. Those things seem contradictory. So the theodicy is the argument that tries to make them fit together. It explains why a good God might allow bad things.
Like the free will defense, maybe? That's a common one.
Exactly. That argument goes, God allows suffering because true goodness requires free will. If we couldn't choose evil, we'd just be robots. Suffering is the terrible but necessary price for genuine moral freedom and love.
Okay, so David gathers these kinds of arguments. But then
This is where his brilliant mind, the throne, as the opening piece put it, kind of turns on him.
he creates evil twins.
Yeah, he inverts the theodicies. He crafts arguments suggesting that the same evidence, the mix of good and evil we see, could just as easily support the existence of a malevolent God.
Whoa. Okay, walk me through that with the free will example. How does that get inverted?
Okay, so David's evil twin might argue. A truly cruel God wouldn't make the world purely evil. That would be too obvious. We'd all unite against him.
Right.
Instead, a cleverly malevolent God would sprinkle in just enough random goodness, a moment of joy, a surprising recovery, an act of kindness precisely to confuse us, to keep hope flickering, preventing us from recognizing the fundamentally cruel nature of reality.
So the occasional good thing isn't proof of benevolence, it's a tool of manipulation in this dark view.
Exactly. It makes the suffering even more insidious, more confusing. It allows cruelty to coexist with sporadic, unexplainable goodness, maximizing our despair.
That is devastating.
Yeah.
And utterly brilliant in a terrifying way.
It leads him to this cognitive deadlock. If the arguments for a good God and a malevolent God both seem to fit the observed facts,
Then the whole framework collapses.
precisely. He concludes the problem isn't necessarily God's nature, but the stories we construct to try and make sense of the unbearable. His concern shifts from heaven or hell to the very possibility of meaning itself.
The intellect has built this perfect cage for his own compassionate heart. The throne trapping the infant. 2. Biopsychosocial summary and presenting problem.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. We need to ground this philosophical crisis in the clinical reality. We have to look at it through a biopsychosocial lens.
Meaning how it affects his body, his mind, and his social world.
Exactly. Starting with the biology, we've already touched on this, but it's crucial. That throat tightness, the blurred vision, that's not metaphorical. That's his body screaming.
It's his nervous system reacting.
Absolutely. It's his sympathetic nervous system going into overdrive. His body is interpreting these images, these thoughts about global suffering, as an immediate personal threat. It's flooding him with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol.
So for his nervous system, that vulture is like a tiger in the room.
Pretty much, yeah. And that detail about Kevin Carter smoking a cigarette under the tree, it becomes symbolic, doesn't it? A small, perhaps inadequate attempt at self-soothing. A tiny moment of dissociation to cope with overwhelming input.
And living in that constant state of high alert must be incredibly draining. Biologically.
Immensely. Which brings us to the psychological dimension. How does his mind cope?
Through that intense intellect.
Right. His primary defense mechanism is intellectualization. He takes the raw, unbearable emotion, the horror, the grief, the helplessness, and instantly converts it into a complex philosophical problem to be solved.
The problem of good and evil becomes his shield.
It's his armor, yeah. Protecting him from the raw terror. But it's flawed armor because it works too well. It cuts him off from feeling the actual emotions, leaving him stranded in this purely intellectual despair, this meaninglessness.
So the tool he uses for protection becomes the cage.
That's exactly it. His intellect is trying to solve what is fundamentally an emotional and spiritual wound. It's a category mistake, really. And we need to introduce a key term here for our listeners, especially students. Moral injury.
Okay, what is that, simply put?
Moral injury is the deep psychological distress that happens when someone perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress their own deeply held moral beliefs and expectations.
So it's not just trauma from danger, it's trauma from violating one's own sense of right and wrong.
Precisely. Or witnessing such violations. For David, just witnessing the kind of suffering represented by that photo, feeling helpless, feeling implicated by his own safety, that can create a moral injury, a sense that the fundamental rules of fairness or goodness have been shattered.
Got it. Okay, so that's bio and psycho. What about the social and spiritual context?
Well, his upbringing is key. He came from a structured faith background like Christianity or maybe Mormonism. That background provided the initial blueprint, the schema for understanding the world, morality, suffering.
The framework he's now wrestling with.
Exactly. His theodicies, even the inverted ones, are built using the logic and concepts from that framework. But now, that same framework is causing immense cognitive dissonance, the mental stress of holding contradictory beliefs or confronting information that shatters your worldview.
And he seems quite isolated in this struggle.
The sources suggest that, yeah, there's no mention of a supportive faith community where he can voice these profound doubts without judgment. He's kind of adrift, alone in this philosophical storm.
This also connects to developmental models, right? For students thinking about NCE prep, this looks like James Fowler's stages of faith development.
Absolutely. It provides crucial context. David's struggle isn't necessarily pathology. You could see it as normative development for someone engaging this deeply. He's likely moving beyond what Fowler called synthetic conventional faith, where beliefs are mostly inherited from your group or authority figures.
He's questioning the rules.
He's demanding personal coherence. He's pushing towards individuative reflective faith, where you take personal responsibility for your beliefs, or maybe even conjunctive faith, where you start to hold paradox and ambiguity. His crisis is the painful transition. It's the agony of moving beyond easy answers to forge something authentic, even if it's unsettling.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the body's stress, the mind's defenses, the social spiritual dissonance, the developmental stage, what's the core presenting problem when he walks into the therapist's office?
He presents with fundamentally existential despair, coupled with that moral fatigue, those intrusive images like the photo, and this pervasive sense of meaning collapse, all stemming from his intense philosophical grappling with suffering. And underneath it all, he's likely avoiding the direct feeling of helplessness by overthinking.
And what does he want? What's his goal for therapy?
He wants to find a way to reconcile his deep compassion with a life that still feels meaningful. He wants to feel the world's pain because he can't not feel it, but without being completely destroyed by it.
The core tension seems to be his empathy, his moral imagination has outrun his ability to emotionally cope, to regulate himself.
That's a perfect way to put it. His capacity to feel the suffering is enormous, but his internal container for holding that feeling without shattering hasn't kept pace. #tag3, clinical context and diagnosis options.
All right, let's put on our clinical hats more formally now. Before anything else, especially for students listening, we have to address the ethical considerations.
Always start with ethics. The ACA Code of Ethics is paramount here. Standard 8.4b personal values is key. The counselor absolutely must remain neutral regarding David's spiritual beliefs or lack thereof.
No trying to fix his faith or argue him back into belief.
None. He needs unconditional positive regard, acceptance of his struggle exactly as it is. The counselor's own beliefs about God or meaning are irrelevant. Their job is to promote David's welfare, period.
Which ties into A1A, primary responsibility. Promoting welfare means ensuring safety first.
Crucial point. Given the depth of his despair, the identification with Kevin Carter, who died by suicide, a thorough assessment for current suicidal ideation is non-negotiable. We also need to assess the severity of the moral injury symptoms. Safety first, always.
And it's so important to frame his struggle correctly. This isn't delusion.
Absolutely not. His profound wrestling is a sign of his depth, his character. It's an existential struggle, potentially part of that normative faith development we mentioned. It's not, in itself, pathology. So diagnosis needs to be approached carefully, respectfully.
Okay, so with that caution in mind, let's look at potential temporary diagnosis options using the DSM-5-TR, what seems like the closest initial fit clinically.
Based on the description, the most likely initial diagnosis would be F43.21 adjustment disorder with depressed mood.
Okay, break that down. Why adjustment disorder?
Because his symptoms, the sadness, the hopelessness, the fatigue, the preoccupation, appear directly linked to a specific identifiable stressor.
The stressor being his moral disillusionment, the collapse of his meaning framework after wrestling with suffering.
Exactly. He's having significant difficulty adjusting to this new, painful understanding of the world, and it's causing clinically significant distress and depressed mood. The symptoms are context-specific, not necessarily indicating a pervasive, long-standing depressive illness.
Now, I need to push back here a little because I can imagine listeners thinking, wait, adjustment disorder sounds mild. This guy sounds deeply, profoundly depressed. Are we minimizing his pain by not calling it major depression?
That's a fair and really important question. It goes right to the heart of differential diagnosis. And yes, his despair is profound, but based on the source material provided, we'd likely rule out F32.1 major depressive disorder, MDD, at least initially.
Why? What's missing for MDD?
The key differentiating factors seem to be the absence of some core MDD symptoms. The sources mention he maintains intellectual curiosity. He's still functioning, albeit with fatigue as a father and writer. There's no mention of global anhedonia, the inability to feel any pleasure. His pain seems laser-focused on the moral and existential dimensions, rather than a complete shutdown of biological drives like sleep, appetite, or interest across the board, which you typically see more severely in MDD.
So the pain is intense, but conceptually focused, rather than globally vegetative.
That seems to be the picture presented, yes. And the timing symptoms arising in response to the identifiable philosophical crisis points more strongly towards adjustment disorder as the primary issue needing clinical attention. It doesn't minimize the pain, it specifies its likely origin and nature.
Okay, that distinction is vital for students.
Yeah.
And we also need to consider the Z codes, right? The contextual factors.
Absolutely essential here. The relevant code is Z65.8, religious or spiritual problem. This is crucial. Z-codes are not mental illness diagnoses. They provide context.
They tell us what the clinical focus is about.
Precisely. Using Z65.8 acknowledges that David's loss of faith coherence, his grief and confusion over his former beliefs, is a primary reason for seeking help. It validates the spiritual dimension of his struggle without calling the struggle itself a mental disorder. It helps everyone stay focused.
So, wrapping up this section. The provisional clinical picture points towards moral injury, manifesting symptoms consistent with adjustment disorder with depressed mood, all within the context of a profound religious or spiritual problem. A complex, sensitive situation requiring a nuanced approach.
Exactly. All right, so we have a handle on the problem. Now, how do we approach helping David? We need theoretical frameworks, different maps, if you will, to navigate his inner world.
Makes sense. Where do we start? Given the nature of his crisis, existential therapy seems like an obvious first stop.
It really has to be primary here. 1. Existential therapy. Thinkers like Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, Irvin Yalom. They deal directly with what Yalom calls the givens of existence.
Death, freedom, isolation, meaninglessness, the big uncomfortable truths.
Exactly. Frankl's background, surviving the Holocaust and developing logotherapy, therapy focused on meaning, is incredibly resonant here.
He found meaning in the face of unimaginable suffering.
He did. And an existential therapist like Yalom wouldn't see David's despair as sickness, but as an awakening. It's the sound of his authentic self bumping up against the hard realities of a universe that doesn't offer guaranteed meaning or fairness.
So the therapy isn't about fixing the despair, but maybe understanding it differently.
Precisely. It shifts the core question. Instead of being paralyzed by, why does God allow this? The focus moves to, given that this is the reality, what meaning can I choose to create in response? Frankl believes suffering endured with purpose can lead to transcendence. David's immense pain could be reframed as proof of his deep commitment to values like compassion and justice.
Okay, powerful stuff. What's next? Maybe something more structured, like CBT.
Yes, 2. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Developed by Aaron Beck, its core idea is simple. Our thoughts influence our feelings and behaviors. Change the thoughts, you can change the feelings and actions.
Can CBT really tackle something this profound? Isn't there a risk of it feeling superficial, like trying to think positive your way out of genuine existential horror?
That's the critical question and a valid concern. No, CBT cannot magically solve the philosophical problem of evil or prove the universe is benevolent. That's not its goal here.
So what can it do for David?
It can help him identify and dismantle the specific, unhelpful thinking patterns, the cognitive distortions that are amplifying his suffering and keeping him stuck. His brilliant philosophical reasoning, while impressive, seems laced with these distortions.
Give me some examples in his case.
Okay, well, overgeneralization. Taking that single horrifying photograph and concluding it defines the entire moral nature of existence. That's a huge leap. Catastrophizing. Assuming that because suffering exists, the only possible conclusion is cosmic malevolence, ignoring any counter-evidence or ambiguity, maybe emotional reasoning. I feel overwhelming despair, therefore the universe must be fundamentally despairing.
So CBT would use Socratic dialogue, questioning these assumptions.
Exactly. The therapist would gently challenge the logic. Okay, you saw this terrible image. Does that necessarily negate every instance of goodness or compassion you've ever witnessed or experienced? Or if you conclude the universe is cruel, does that logically prevent you from choosing to act with kindness? The aim isn't false positivity, but restoring intellectual balance, helping him see his conclusions as interpretations, not objective facts.
Okay, I see the value there. What else?
We absolutely need 3. Person-centered therapy, PCT, Carl Rogers' approach. This one focuses heavily on the therapeutic relationship itself.
Given David's intellectual defenses and perhaps deep self-judgment about his crisis of faith, this feels essential, the core conditions.
Unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence.
Gotcha.
Genuineness. Yes, David desperately needs a space where he doesn't feel judged for his doubt, his despair, his philosophical knots.
So the relationship itself is healing.
Rogers believes so. Providing genuine warmth and acceptance can counter David's likely harsh self-criticism. PCT aims to help him reconnect with his own inner wisdom, his organismic valuing process, that gut sense of what feels right and true for him, which his over-analytical intellect seems to have drowned out. It's about repairing the split between his head and his heart, helping him trust himself again.
Makes sense. And finally, you mentioned ACT earlier.
Yes. 4. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. This is considered a third-wave cognitive therapy, bringing in mindfulness and values.
And where CBT tries to change thoughts, ACT focuses more on accepting them.
Accepting the presence of difficult thoughts and feelings without necessarily believing them or fighting them. ACT sees David's endless philosophizing as a form of experiential avoidance.
He's avoiding the raw feeling of helplessness by retreating into complex thought.
That's the idea. So ACT focuses on acceptance. Acknowledging that life does contain pain, uncertainty, even moments that feel meaningless, without needing to eradicate those feelings. And crucially, diffusion.
Diffusion. Seeing thoughts as just thoughts.
Exactly. Not as literal commands or objective truths. Helping David shift from the universe is evil to I am having the thought that the universe is evil. It creates distance. It lessens the thought's power.
And once you have that distance,
you pivot to values clarification. What truly matters to David deep down: compassion, connection, fatherhood, creativity. Instead of being paralyzed trying to solve the cosmic puzzle, ACT helps him identify his core values and commit to taking small, concrete actions aligned with those values, despite the existential uncertainty. Meaning is found in valued action, not in final answers.
So integrating these, it sounds like existential therapy frames the deep questions, PCT creates the safety to explore them, CBT tackles the specific thought traps, and ACT provides the tools to accept the uncertainty and move forward anyway.
Beautifully summarized. It's about helping David move from trying to intellectually control the uncontrollable towards reconnecting with his own embodied experience and finding meaning in his own chosen actions. Not resolving the paradox, but learning to live meaningfully within it. #Tag 5. Interventions and rationales.
Okay, let's get really practical now. Based on those frameworks, what specific interventions would a therapist likely use with David, and why? What's the rationale?
The overall theme is integrating head and heart, right? Cultivating both top-down cognitive coherence and bottom-up somatic regulation.
Makes sense. So intervention 1.
Stems directly from existential therapy, existential exploration and meaning reconstruction. The rationale is to reframe the despair itself.
How do you do that?
You validate the pain deeply, but you also explore it as evidence of his values. Using Frankl's idea of the defiant power of the spirit, you might say, your outrage, your sorrow. This isn't weakness. This is the sound of your conscience, your deep commitment to goodness, reacting to a world that violates it. Meaning isn't found out there. It's created by his response.
Okay, reframing despair as proof of conscience. What needs to pair with that? His body is still reacting intensely.
Absolutely. So intervention 2 must be mindfulness-based emotional grounding. The rationale is pure somatic regulation, calming that hyperactivated nervous system.
Techniques like
focused breathing, especially extending the exhale, which stimulates the calming vagal nerve. Detailed body scans to bring awareness back to the present physical sensations. Anchoring in the senses, what can you see, hear, touch right now? The goal is to interrupt the hijack by intrusive images or overwhelming thoughts, creating moments of safety within his own body, teaching his system it can feel distress without collapsing.
Right, bringing him back to the here and now, physically. Then tackling the thoughts directly.
Yes, using cognitive restructuring from CBT rationale, identify and challenge those specific cognitive distortions we talked about.
Oh, that look in session.
You'd collaboratively identify a thought like, because that child suffered, all goodness is a lie. Then you'd examine the evidence for and against it. You'd work towards crafting a more balanced, functional thought like, That suffering was horrific and reveals a terrible reality, and my intense reaction to it reveals my own deep capacity for empathy, which is a form of goodness. It shifts the focus from external condemnation to internal strength.
Replacing catastrophic conclusions with more nuanced, self-aware statements. Got it. What about moving him towards action?
That's where values clarification from ACT comes in. Rationale. Restore a sense of agency that gets lost when you're wrestling with cosmic scale problems.
How does that work practically?
You shift the focus from is the universe good to what does goodness look like in your life? What kind of father, writer, friend do you want to be, regardless of the universe's nature? You help him define his core values and then brainstorm small, concrete, achievable actions he can take this week that align with those values. Maybe it's spending quality time with his child, writing something meaningful, or volunteering briefly. It anchors meaning in his own behavior.
Breaking the paralysis by focusing on his sphere of influence. I like that. Any other techniques?
A really useful one, especially when someone feels consumed by a problem, is a narrative therapy technique. Externalizing the problem. Rationale. Create psychological distance and reduce identification with the struggle.
How do you externalize something like the problem of evil?
You personify it. You might invite David to talk about the vulture of despair or the meaning collapse, as if it's an external character or force influencing him. What does the vulture whisper to you? When is it strongest? What helps you resist it? This simple linguistic shift helps him see the problem as separate from his core self. He's struggling with despair, not defined by it.
That sounds like it could be really empowering.
Yeah.
And one more thing, his faith background is so central. How do you handle that?
Crucially, with culturally responsive integration of faith language. Rationale. Validate his spiritual framework while gently expanding it. You don't impose beliefs, but you use metaphor and concepts familiar to him. You might validate his struggle as a dark night of the soul, a concept with deep spiritual roots, or use imagery. If life is a tapestry woven with threads of both light and darkness, how does your awareness of the darkness inform how you weave your own threads of light? Or, referencing the vulture image again, could the vulture symbolize not just external cruelty, but also the shadow parts within humanity and difference? Perhaps that compassion calls us to confront. It honors his language while opening possibilities beyond rigid dogma.
So a multi-layered approach.
Yeah.
Existential reframing, somatic grounding, cognitive challenging, values-based action, narrative externalizing, and culturally sensitive dialogue.
Exactly. Addressing the whole person, mind, body, spirit, and story. And this brings us back to something really critical, something we touched on but need to explore more deeply. David's philosophy isn't just in his head, it's embodied.
That throat tightness again. It's not a metaphor.
It's literally his nervous system reacting to his thoughts and feelings about morality and suffering. His body is keeping the score, so to speak.
This sounds like where polyvagal theory, from Stephen Porges, becomes really relevant. Can you break that down simply for us? What's the vagus nerve?
Think of the vagus nerve as like the internal internet of your body. It's a huge nerve running from the brainstem down through your face, throat, chest, and abdomen. It's constantly sending information back and forth between your brain and your organs.
And it controls our basic state, like calm versus stressed.
Essentially, yes. Porges describes 3 main circuits or states governed by the vagus nerve, arranged kind of like a ladder. At the top, you have the ventral vagal state. This is the safe and social mode. You feel calm, connected, curious, grounded. Your heart rate is regulated. You can make eye contact. Your voice has inflection. This is where optimal human functioning happens.
Okay, safe and social. What's next down the ladder?
If the vagus nerve detects a threat, it can shift us into the sympathetic nervous system state. That's the familiar fight or flight response. Heart pounds, muscles tense, breathing quickens. You're mobilized for action, for survival.
Right, stress response. And David seems to be living there a lot. But then there's another level.
Yes. If the threat feels overwhelming, inescapable. If fight or flight seem impossible, the system can drop down into the oldest circuit, the dorsal vagal state. This is the freeze or shutdown response.
Like an animal playing dead.
Exactly. It's an immobilization response. Think fainting, dissociation, feeling numb, heavy, collapsed. Heart rate and breathing might slow dramatically. And importantly for David, this state often involves constriction in the throat and larynx area.
Ah, the throat tightness.
Precisely. When David visualizes the suffering child, feeling utterly helpless to intervene, his nervous system interprets that as inescapable threat. It bypasses fight-flight and drops into dorsal vagal shutdown. The throat constricts as part of that primitive immobilization defense. His physical feeling is the physiological signature of profound helplessness.
Wow. So his body is literally enacting the feeling of being trapped by the horror he's witnessing or contemplating?
That's the polyvagal perspective, yes, and it connects to neural mirroring too.
How so?
Our brains have mirror neurons. When we see someone else experiencing an emotion or performing an action, our mirror neurons fire as if we were doing it or feeling it ourselves. It's the basis of empathy.
So David's brain is, in a way, simulating the child's suffering.
It's resonating with it, yes. He's vicariously experiencing that terror and helplessness. His highly sensitive system becomes this vessel for compassion, but because the threat, the suffering, is distant, abstract, and unresolvable by him personally, the empathetic response doesn't lead to helpful action. Instead, it just keeps triggering his own trauma response. It becomes a form of secondary trauma or vicarious traumatization.
His empathy is wounding him.
In a very real physiological way, and his attempt to fix it with philosophy. The theodicies.
From a neural perspective, what's happening there?
You could see it as a desperate cortical strategy.
Yeah.
The newest part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the throne, is trying to use logic and reason to override or make sense of the overwhelming signals coming from the older, more primitive parts of the brain and the body, the limbic system, the vagal nerve.
The thinking brain trying to calm the feeling body.
Exactly. It's an attempt at top-down regulation. But because logic alone can't change the felt sense of threat or the reality of suffering, it fails. It just leads to more rumination, which keeps feeding the distress loop. Pain, thinking, more pain.
And this chronic stress state has broader health implications, right? This connects to psychoneuroimmunology. PNI.
Yes. PNI studies how our psychological states, psycho, nervous system, neuro, and immune system, immunology, all interact. Chronic stress, like David's, keeps cortisol levels high. Over time, this can suppress immune function, disrupt endocrine balance, interfere with sleep, digestion. Basically, his philosophical crisis is likely impacting his overall physical health. It's not all in his head, it's in his cells, his hormones, his nerves.
So the therapeutic goal isn't just changing thoughts. It's fundamentally about rewiring the nervous system's response.
That's a huge part of it. Healing involves teaching the nervous system that it's possible to feel empathy, even intense moral distress, without automatically collapsing into shutdown.
How do you do that?
Through those grounding techniques we mentioned, mindfulness, somatic awareness, you intentionally co-activate feelings of safety, calm breathing, feeling feet on the floor, while gently allowing small doses of the difficult emotion, sadness, outrage. Repeatedly pairing safety with the distress signal helps the vagal circuit learn a new pattern. It learns, I can touch this pain and I'm still okay. I can feel compassion and still be grounded. You're creating new neural pathways that link empathy with resilience, not collapse.
This feels like it could profoundly shift his core question.
I think it does. The initial paralyzing question, what kind of God allows this, might evolve as he integrates his body's experience into something more like, what kind of body feels this? What does this feeling tell me about what I value? And what am I capable of doing with this feeling from this grounded place?
The nervous system becomes the place where theology and biology actually meet.
Beautifully put. It becomes the altar for integrating the whole experience. The ancient learns to feel, and the throne learns to guide that feeling constructively. #Tag7, therapy's role and key NCE concepts.
So, okay, we've painted this picture of profound existential and embodied struggle. For someone like David wrestling with questions that have baffled humanity for ages, what can therapy realistically offer? How does it actually help?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Therapy can't answer him the final answer to the problem of evil, but it offers something else, something vital. First, it offers sanctuary.
The safe space.
A deeply safe, non-judgmental space where his intense moral sensitivity isn't seen as a flaw or an overreaction, but is reframed as a strength, a sign of his deep humanity. That validation alone can be incredibly healing.
Okay, sanctuary. What else?
Containment. Therapy provides a container for the immense grief he's experiencing, grief over lost certainty, grief over the suffering he witnesses, grief over maybe a lost sense of innocence. The therapist helps hold that emotional weight so it doesn't completely overwhelm him.
Like an emotional holding environment.
Exactly. And third, crucially, co-regulation. The therapist, through their own calm, attuned presence, actually helps regulate David's nervous system in the room. Remember the polyvagal stuff? Being with a safe, grounded person sends safety cues to his nervous system. Over time, he internalizes this, learning to self-regulate more effectively.
So, sanctuary, containment, co-regulation, and ultimately it helps him shift focus.
Yes. Therapy helps him pivot from trying to solve the unsolvable cosmic problem to finding meaning and agency in his own life. It redirects that powerful intellectual and emotional energy towards moral agency within his sphere of influence. What good can I create today? How can I live my values? It brings the locus of control back to him in the present.
Okay, that makes sense. So when should someone who may relates to David's deep thinking, his moral sensitivity, when should they consider seeking therapy? What's the line between healthy reflection and something needing support?
It's a great question. Deep thinking about life's big questions is healthy, even necessary. Therapy becomes important when that reflection turns into paralysis.
When thinking stops you from living.
Exactly. When the rumination becomes a constant intrusive loop you can't escape. When it leads to significant functional impairment, difficulty working, connecting with loved ones, taking care of yourself. When it breeds chronic cynicism, isolation, or a loss of your own sense of identity beyond the philosophical struggle.
And the physical signs, too.
Definitely. That persistent somatic distress, we talked about the throat tightness, chest pain, chronic fatigue, sleep disruption linked to the moral or existential thoughts. If your empathy consistently hurts more than it helps, if your compassion leads primarily to burnout and despair rather than connection or action, that's a sign that professional support could be really beneficial to restore balance.
Seek therapy when reflection becomes rumination and empathy becomes paralyzing pain. Got it. Now, for our student listeners, let's quickly recap the key NCE concepts we've woven through this deep dive, just to crystallize them.
Good idea. We definitely hit moral injury hard, understanding that distress from witnessed or perpetrated acts violating core beliefs, often found in NCE materials around trauma, like Module 3.12.
Right. And the importance of differential diagnosis, Module 13, specifically distinguishing David's presentation, likely adjustment disorder, from major depressive disorder by looking closely at the symptom profile and onset.
Absolutely. We emphasized using spiritual or religious problems, Z codes, like Z65.8, often in Module 1.2.31 or similar, to frame the context without pathologizing the spiritual struggle itself.
We applied cognitive distortions, Module 33 from CBT, showing how things like overgeneralization fueled his despair.
And we explored multiple theoretical applications. Existential therapy, Module 1.5.18, focusing on meaning. Person-centered therapy, emphasizing the therapeutic alliance, Module 2.5. And ACT processes, Module 1.5.24, like diffusion and values-based action.
Plus, the whole discussion was underpinned by a trauma-informed care perspective, particularly incorporating polyvagal theory to understand the somatic embodied nature of his crisis.
Exactly. And just as a practical note for students or clinicians wanting to dig deeper, the kinds of recommended resources touching on these themes would include Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning,
A classic.
Irvin Yalom's Existential Psychotherapy, core ACT texts like those by Stephen Hayes, definitely the current ACA Code of Ethics for the ethical grounding, and something accessible on polyvagal theory like Porges' Pocket Guide.
Great list. Helpful for continued study. #Tag8, Infants on Throne Summary.
So, bringing it all together, David's journey, this intense, painful struggle, it really does embody that opening metaphor, doesn't it? The infants on thrones.
It feels like a perfect description, the throne being.
The throne is that magnificent, complex human brain, the prefrontal cortex, capable of abstract thought, deep analysis, building intricate philosophical systems like David's Theodicies, but also capable of creating traps for itself, getting lost in its own constructs.
And the infant.
The infant is the core self, the emerging consciousness, that raw, vulnerable, deeply feeling part of us that holds our moral compass, our capacity for empathy, our longing for meaning and connection.
And when that infant consciousness first truly sees the profound contradictions of the world, the immense love and the immense cruelty existing side by side, like the starving child and the vulture,
it triggers this profound developmental crisis. The infant, perched on this powerful throne of intellect, doesn't yet know how to wield that power without being overwhelmed or self-destructing. It's trying to make sense of the senseless, using tools it hasn't fully mastered.
So David's suffering, his philosophical despair, it's not a failure.
From this perspective, no. It's a necessary, albeit agonizing, part of growth. It's like the mind's adolescence, messy, painful, full of questioning on the path towards a more integrated wisdom. His relentless questioning, even leading to collapse, actually dignifies the human spirit's deep need for coherence, for compassion. It's a milestone in the evolution of consciousness.
The healing path, then, isn't about finding the right answer to the cosmic questions.
No, I don't think so. It's about integration. It's about harmonizing the brilliant analytical mind, the throne, with the deeply feeling, morally sensitive body and heart, the infant.
Teaching the nervous system it can hold both the pain and the safety. Teaching the self how to use the power of thought constructively, guided by embodied values.
Exactly. Helping the infant learn to skillfully operate the throne, using its power for connection and meaningful action, rather than getting lost in its abstract labyrinths.
And maybe that's what it means for all of us to be infants on thrones.
Yeah.
And with that, the AI Puppet Show endeth. Hiroshiko onegai shimasu.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.